Ronald Read worked at a gas station. Then he was a janitor. He wore the same flannel shirt for 30 years, drove a second-hand Toyota that barely started, lived in a small two-bedroom house he bought for $12,000 in 1970. His neighbors thought he was poor, not struggling, just modest, living on a pension, getting by. The kind of guy you'd see at the hardware store buying discounted paint and think, nice old man, probably counting pennies. Nobody knew, not his neighbors, not his friends, not even his family, really. Because Ronald didn't talk about money. He didn't talk about stocks. He didn't talk about investing. He just lived his quiet life, worked his modest job, and every week, without fail, he bought a few shares of stock. When Ronald died in 2014 at age 92, his lawyer opened his will. The reading was supposed to be routine. A small estate, maybe the house, maybe a few thousand in savings. The lawyer started reading. Then he stopped. He read it again. Then he looked up at Ronald's family with an expression of complete disbelief. Mr. Read, this estate is valued at approximately $8 million. Silence. Then chaos. $8 million? That couldn't be right. Ronald was a janitor. He drove a 20-year-old car. He used coupons at the grocery store. He fixed his own broken appliances with duct tape and determination. How could Ronald Read, gas station attendant turned janitor, die with $8 million? The answer is simple, and it will either inspire you or infuriate you, because what Ronald did wasn't complicated. It wasn't sophisticated. It required no special knowledge or insider information. What Ronald did was this. He bought stocks. He held them. He never sold. For over 50 years. That's it. That's the entire secret. Buy quality companies, hold forever. Ignore the noise. Let me tell you Ronald's story. Because it's not just a story about getting rich. It's a story about patience, discipline, and the power of being invisible. Ronald was born in 1921 in rural Vermont. He grew up during the Depression. His family had nothing. They weren't poor by choice. They were poor because everyone was poor. Ronald learned early that money doesn't fall from the sky. You work for it, you save it, you don't waste it. Those lessons stayed with him his entire life. His father worked in a mill. When the Depression hit, the mill closed. Ronald watched his father search for work. Any work, he watched his mother stretch every dollar until it screamed. He watched neighbors lose their homes, their dignity, their hope. That experience marked him. It taught him that security isn't guaranteed, that comfort is temporary, that the only real safety comes from what you own, not what you earn. After high school, Ronald got a job at a gas station. He pumped gas, changed oil, fixed flat tires. It wasn't glamorous, but it was work, and work meant money. In the 1950s, Ronald started buying stocks, not because he was a sophisticated investor, not because he studied financial statements, but because he understood something simple. When you own a share of stock, you own a piece of a company. If the company does well, your share becomes more valuable. If the company pays dividends, you get a portion of the profits. Ronald liked that idea. Owning pieces of businesses, being a partner, even a tiny one, in companies that made things people needed. So he started buying a few shares here, a few shares there, companies he recognized, companies that made products he used, companies that seemed stable and reliable. Procter Gamble. They made soap. People always need soap. Johnson & Johnson. They made Band-Aids and baby powder. People always need those. CVS. People always need pharmacies. JP Morgan. People always need banks.
Nothing exciting, nothing trendy, just boring, reliable, essential businesses.
Every week, Ronald took a portion of his paycheck and bought more shares. It wasn't much, maybe $50, maybe $100. Depends on the week, but it was consistent week after week, month after month, year after year. His coworkers thought he was crazy. Ronald, why don't you buy a new car? Why don't you take a vacation? Why don't you live a little? Ronald would smile and shrug. I'm doing fine. He didn't explain. He didn't defend. He just kept buying stocks. In 1963, Ronald retired from the gas station. He was 62. Most people his age were done working, but Ronald wasn't most people. He got a job as a janitor, not because he needed the money desperately, but because he liked working, and because the more he earned, the more he could invest. So for the next 20 years, Ronald mopped floors, cleaned bathrooms, and emptied trash cans. And every week, he bought more stock. His neighbors saw a janitor. Ronald saw an investor building an empire, one share at a time. The janitor job paid less than the gas station, maybe $25,000 a year. But Ronald's expenses were even lower, maybe $15,000 a year to invest, plus the dividends from his existing portfolio, which he reinvested automatically. By the early 1970s, Ronald's portfolio had reached $50,000, a substantial sum, more than most people his age had saved. But he told no one. He kept working, kept investing, kept living in the same small house. His wife, who he'd married late in life, knew about the investments. She supported him. She understood. They lived frugally together, cooked at home, gardened, enjoyed simple pleasures. They didn't need much. When his wife died in the 1990s, Ronald was devastated, but he didn't change his routine. He kept working, kept investing. The discipline sustained him through grief. By the 1980s, Ronald's portfolio was substantial. Not millions yet, but hundreds of thousands, enough that he could have retired, upgraded his car, moved to a nicer house. He didn't. He kept driving the Toyota, kept living in the small house, kept wearing a flannel shirt, because Ronald didn't care about looking rich. He cared about being rich, and being rich meant not spending money on things that didn't matter. Let me tell you about Ronald's lifestyle, because this is important. This is how he accumulated $8 million on a janitor's salary. Ronald's house cost $12,000 in 1970. He paid it off in 10 years. After that, no mortgage, no rent. His biggest expense was gone. His property taxes were maybe $1,200 a year. His utilities maybe $1,500. Insurance maybe $800. Total annual housing costs $3,500. That's $2,092 a month. His car was a used Toyota. He bought it for $3,000. He drove it for 25 years. When it finally died, he bought another used car for $4,000. No car payments, no interest, just cash. He spent maybe $500 a year on car insurance, maybe $1,000 on gas and maintenance. Total annual transportation costs $1,500. His clothes were simple. Flannel shirts from the discount store, jeans, work boots. He didn't care about fashion. He cared about durability. One flannel shirt lasted 10 years. He spent maybe $300 a year on clothes. Total. His food was basic. He cooked at home. Oatmeal for breakfast. Sandwiches for lunch. Simple dinners. He didn't eat out. He didn't order takeout. He cooked. His grocery bill was maybe $200 a month. $2,400 a year. He bought store brands. He used coupons. He avoided waste. His entertainment was free. He read library books. He listened to the radio. He took walks. He talked to neighbors. He didn't need cable TV or movie theaters or expensive hobbies. His total annual expenses, maybe $12,000 on a $25,000 janitor salary. That left $13,000 to invest every year for decades. People looked at Ronald and saw poverty. Ronald looked at his bank account and saw freedom. By the 1990s, Ronald's portfolio had crossed $1 million. He was a millionaire, a janitor millionaire, still mopping floors, still driving the old Toyota. Why? Because he didn't need to stop. The work kept him active. The salary, small as it was, kept funding his investments, and the investments kept compounding. By 2000, his portfolio was worth $3 million. By 2008, despite the financial crisis, it was worth $5 million. By 2014, when Ronald died, it was worth $8 million. 50 years of buying and holding. 50 years of dividends reinvested. 50 years of compounding. 50 years of living below his means. That's how a janitor dies with $8 million. Now let me tell you what Ronald did with the money, because this is where the story becomes truly remarkable. Ronald didn't spend it. Not on himself. He didn't buy a mansion. He didn't travel the world. He didn't live large in his final years. He gave it away. When his will was read, Ronald left $8 million split between two beneficiaries. The local library received $1.2 million. The local hospital received $4.8 million. His stepchildren received $2 million. Ronald spent his life accumulating wealth, and then he gave almost all of it away to his community. The librarians who'd helped him find books for 50 years received a donation that transformed their small library. They built a new wing, bought computers, expanded the children's section, all because a janitor they'd known as Quiet Ron left them over $1 million. The hospital that had cared for his late wife received a donation that built a new wing, the Ronald Read Residential Care Facility, a place where elderly patients could receive long-term care with dignity, named after a man who mopped their floors. His stepchildren, who had watched him live modestly for decades, received enough money to change their lives, pay off mortgages, fund education, retire early. They'd known he was frugal. They had no idea he was wealthy. Ronald Read, the janitor nobody thought about, became one of the most generous philanthropists in Vermont history. The local newspaper ran his obituary with shock and admiration. Local janitor leaves $8 million to library and hospital. The story went viral. CNN covered it. Forbes covered it. Financial blogs analyzed his portfolio. Everyone wanted to know, how did he do it? Now let me contrast Ronald's story with another story. A story that happened in the same town at the same time. Richard was a lawyer, a successful one. Big house, new Mercedes, country club membership. He looked rich. He acted rich. Everyone assumed he was rich. Richard made $250,000 a year, 10 times what Ronald made, maybe more. Richard graduated from a prestigious law school. He joined a top firm. He made partner at 35. He was on track for a brilliant career. But Richard also spent $75,000 a year. The house had a big mortgage. The Mercedes had a big payment. The country club had big dues. Private school for the kids. Vacations to Europe. Dinners at expensive restaurants. Richard's life looked like success. And in many ways it was. He was respected, admired, envied. But he was also stressed. The mortgage was $6,000. The car payment was $1,200. The country club dues were $2,000. The private school tuition was $40,000 a year per child. 2 children. Richard couldn't afford to lose his job. Couldn't afford a bad year. Couldn't afford to slow down. He was trapped on a treadmill of his own making. Every dollar he made, he spent, plus a little more. Credit cards filled the gap. Home equity loans, the facade of wealth, financed by debt. Richard looked successful. And he had a great career, but he wasn't building wealth because every dollar he made, he spent, plus a little more. When Richard died in 2012, 2 years before Ronald, his estate was worth $250,000, mostly the equity in his house. After debts, his family inherited about $100,000. Richard made millions during his career. Ronald made hundreds of thousands, but Ronald died 80 times wealthier than Richard. How? Because Richard optimized for appearing rich. Ronald optimized for being rich. And those are very different goals. Richard's children had to sell the house, downsize, adjust to a dramatically lower standard of living. The money was gone. The lifestyle unsustainable. The inheritance minimal. Ronald's stepchildren received life-changing wealth, enough to be financially secure forever, from a man who looked like he had nothing. The irony is perfect. The lawyer who looked rich died poor. The janitor who looked poor died rich. Let me tell you what Ronald understood that most people don't. He understood that wealth is invisible. It's not the car you drive or the house you live in. It's the assets you own, the stocks, the bonds, the investments that generate income whether you work or not. Ronald looked poor. He was rich. Richard looked rich. He died poor. That's the paradox of wealth. The people who look wealthy usually aren't, and the people who are wealthy usually don't look it, because real wealth is boring. It's a brokerage account statement that shows millions in stocks you've held for decades. It's not a sports car in the driveway. Real wealth is invisible. It's numbers on a screen. It's shares of companies you'll never visit. It's dividends deposited automatically into accounts you rarely check. Ronald also understood compounding, not intellectually. He probably couldn't explain the mathematical formula, but he understood it practically. He knew that if he bought good companies and held them, they'd grow. The dividends would increase. The stock prices would rise. And if he reinvested those dividends to buy more shares, the growth would accelerate. That's compounding. Growth on top of growth on top of growth. Ronald's first $100 investment in Procter Gamble in 1960 was worth over $50,000 by 2014. That's 500x. Not because he was smart, because he held for 54 years. The stock split multiple times. The dividends bought more shares. Those shares paid dividends. Those dividends bought more shares. On and on. Compounding. Most people can't hold a stock for 54 days, much less 54 years. Ronald held for 54 years. That's why he died with $8 million. Now let me address what you're thinking. Charlie Ronald was lucky. He invested during a bull market. He didn't face what we face today. Wrong. Ronald faced everything. He invested through the 1960s inflation, the 1970s stagflation, the 1987 crash, the 2000 dot-com bust, the 2008 financial crisis. He saw his portfolio drop 30% or percent multiple times. In 1974, his portfolio probably dropped 50%. In 2008, probably 40%. He watched stocks he owned cut their dividends. He lived through recessions, oil crises, political chaos. He faced all of it. And he never sold. He just kept buying, week after week, through good times and bad times. During the 1987 crash, when the market dropped 22% in a single day, Ronald went to work, mopped floors, came home, and the next week he bought more stock at lower prices. During the 2008 financial crisis, when people were panicking and selling everything, Ronald kept buying. He was 87 years old, still buying stocks. That's not luck. That's discipline. Let me tell you about the companies Ronald owned, because this reveals his strategy. Simple as it worked. Ronald owned about 95 stocks at the time of his death. That's more than I'd recommend. But they weren't random. They followed a pattern. Blue chip dividend payers. Companies that had been around for decades. Companies that made products people used every day. Companies that paid reliable dividends and increased them over time. Procter Gamble, Johnson & Johnson, CBS, JP Morgan Chase, General Electric before it fell apart, Colgate, Palmolive, 3M, AT&T. These weren't exciting stocks. They were boring, predictable, reliable. The kind of stocks sophisticated investors ignore because they're too slow. But slow and steady beats fast and erratic. Always has, always will. Ronald stocks paid dividends. Those dividends were automatically reinvested to buy more shares. Every quarter, his share count increased. And the more shares he owned, the more dividends he received. And the more dividends he ate, the more shares he could buy. Compounding on compounding on compounding. The exciting tech stocks of the 1990s. Ronald didn't own them. He missed the dot-com boom. He also missed the dot-com bust. The financial engineering of the 2000s, Ronald didn't understand it. He stuck to boring dividend stocks. He missed the housing bubble. He also missed the housing collapse. While sophisticated investors were chasing trends and blowing up, Ronald was quietly accumulating shares in companies that made soap and Band-Aids. And in the end, Ronald won. Not because he was smarter, because he was simpler. Let me tell you what happened after Ronald's death. When the story hit the news, it went viral. People were shocked, inspired, amazed. A janitor with $8 million. How? Financial advisors analyzed his portfolio. Brilliant diversification, perfect stock selection, optimal dividend reinvestment strategy. They were wrong. Ronald didn't have a strategy. He had a habit. Buy stocks, hold stocks, reinvest dividends, repeat. That's not brilliant. That's discipline. But the media loved the story. And for a few weeks, everyone talked about Ronald Read, the millionaire janitor The man who proved that you don't need a fancy degree or a high income to get rich. Financial gurus gave talks about the Ronald Read method. Books were written, seminars were held. Everyone wanted to bottle his secret and sell it.
Then the story faded. People moved on, and most of them went back to their old habits, spending everything they make, chasing hot stocks, timing the market, doing all the things Ronald never did.
Because people don't want to live like Ronald. They don't want to drive an old car. They don't want to wear the same clothes for decades. They don't want to be invisible. They want to look rich now, even if it means never being rich. That's the tragedy. Ronald's lesson is simple, but almost no one will follow it because it requires sacrifice, patience, and visibility. And those things are psychologically painful. Now let me tell you the lesson, the real lesson. Not buy dividend stocks or reinvest dividends. Those are tactics. The lesson is this: wealth is built by living below your means and investing the difference consistently for decades.
It's not complicated. It's not sophisticated. It doesn't require genius. It requires discipline.
Ronald made maybe $50,000 a year as a janitor, maybe less. But he lived on $30,000, maybe less. The difference, invested every week, every month, every year. That's how you turn a modest income into $8 million. You don't spend it, you invest it, and you let time work for you. Most people do the opposite. They make $50,000 and spend $55,000. They finance the difference with debt, and they wonder why they're not getting ahead. You can't build wealth if you spend everything you make. It's mathematically impossible. The money has to go somewhere. Either it goes into your lifestyle or it goes into assets. You choose. Ronald chose assets. Richard chose lifestyle. Ronald died with $8 million. Richard died with $100,000. That's the choice. Every day, every purchase, every decision, lifestyle or assets. Appearing rich or being rich. Most people will choose lifestyle. They'll choose the new car, the bigger house, the nicer clothes, the expensive dinners. They'll choose to look rich, and they'll die broke. A few people will choose assets. They'll drive the old car. They'll live in the modest house. They'll wear the simple clothes. They'll cook at home, and they'll die rich. Ronald chose assets, and now his name is on a hospital wing and a library renovation. Richard chose lifestyle, and his name is forgotten. Which do you want? Let me end with this. Ronald Read's story isn't about stocks. It's about character, discipline, patience, the willingness to delay gratification for decades. It's about living invisibly in a world that rewards visibility. It's about ignoring what other people think and focusing on what actually matters. Ronald had a small income, but he had a huge gap because he spent almost nothing. And that gap, invested consistently for 50 years, created $8 million. You can do this. You probably make more than Ronald did. You probably have more opportunities. You certainly have more information. But will you? Will you drive the old car? Will you live in the modest house? Will you invest every week for 50 years? Probably not, because it's hard, it's boring, it's invisible. But if you can, if you have the discipline, you'll die like Ronald, not just rich, but free, secure, generous, impactful. That's the lesson of Ronald Read, the millionaire janitor nobody knew about.